Every now and then you come across a story that just seems to defy all logic. It's about a man who, by all accounts, did the impossible. And he didn't do it with money or power. He did it with a truly radical idea. His name was George Müller, and his life really makes you question the limits of what's possible.
Take a look at this number, over 10,000. That's how many orphaned children George Müller personally housed, fed, clothed, and educated in his lifetime. I mean, to put that into perspective, that would be an incredible achievement for a huge organization today, let alone for one guy back in the 19th century.
And here is where the story gets really mind-bending, the central mystery we're going to dig into. How on earth did he pull this off, without ever holding a fundraiser, sending out a single support letter, or asking anyone for a donation? The answer is just as radical as the man himself.
So, to really get how Müller operated, we have to understand his core philosophy. It was this one single idea that powered his entire life's work, a principle that, let's be honest, most of us would think is, well, impossible. And Müller said it best himself: faith does not operate in the realm of the possible. That quote was his guiding star. See, in his mind, if you could accomplish something through just normal human effort, it didn't really require faith. He was intentionally aiming for goals that looked impossible from the outset.
What makes this story even more amazing is where he came from. The man who would become this incredible example of faith and service, well, he wasn't always a saint. In fact, his beginnings were about as far from it as you could possibly imagine.
His transformation was just dramatic and total. So he was born in Prussia, and as a young man, he was a liar, a gambler, and even a thief. But then, one single event, a small Bible study, sparked his profound spiritual experience that completely changed his life's direction. Soon after that, he picked up and moved to England, ready to start his real work.
The contrast here is just staggering, isn't it? He went from a life of taking and deceit to a life of radical giving and service. And that complete 180-degree turn is absolutely key to understanding everything he would go on to do.
So, once he got to England, the new George Müller didn't just settle into some quiet, comfortable life. No, he looked at the world around him. He saw these deep, pressing needs, and he felt this undeniable call to do something about it.
There were two things in particular that just weighed on him. First, what he saw as a kind of spiritual coldness in the churches. And second, the absolutely heartbreaking situation of poor, destitute kids on the streets of Victorian England. To him, these weren't just abstract problems, they were urgent crises.
And his response? It was direct and it was audacious. He started the Ashley Down orphan houses in Bristol, creating a home for the children that it seemed like nobody else wanted.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just what Müller did that was so remarkable. It was how he did it. His method was the secret sauce to his entire operation, and it was maybe even more radical than the mission itself.
Okay, so here was his number one rule, the thing he would never, ever break. He would rely completely on prayer for every single need. Now think about that. In an age of industry and science, making this kind of public, absolute declaration of dependence on God alone was, well, it was deeply countercultural. He would never ask people for money, he would only ask God.
And this verse, right here, this was pretty much the bedrock of his confidence. He truly believed that if this was God's work, then God would provide for it. He took that promise literally, and he bet his entire life's mission and the lives of thousands of kids on it.
And let me tell you, this trust was tested constantly. There's this famous story about one morning when the children were all sitting at the tables for breakfast, but the tables were completely bare. There was no food in the house. Nothing. No bread, no milk, zip. But Müller had them all pray anyway, giving thanks for the food they were about to receive. And just as they finished, the doorbell rang. It was a local baker who just felt prompted to bring them fresh bread. A few moments later, a milkman's cart breaks down right outside the orphanage, and he offers them all his fresh milk before it spoils. Just like that, breakfast was served.
It's an incredible story, right? But it's so much more than just a historical curiosity. So, what can we actually take away from this? There are a few key lessons from Müller's life that are just as relevant today as they were back then.
You can really boil his approach down to three core ideas. First, be specific. Second, you have to live your message. And third, you have to trust fully. So let's break that down. For Müller, vague prayers got vague answers. He was incredibly specific about every need, right down to the last penny. Then his actions, caring for thousands of kids, gave so much power and credibility to his words. His life was his message. And finally, that trust wasn't some blind leap in the dark. For him, it was a logical step based on a foundation he considered totally and completely reliable.
When people would ask him, what's the secret to all this was his answer. It really speaks to this radical level of self-surrender, this belief that he had to get his own ego, his own desires out of the way to do the work he felt called to. And that, right there, was the heart of his transformation.
So in the end, George Müller's entire life was a testament to his own motto. His story leaves all of us with a pretty challenging question. What could we achieve in our own lives, in our own work, if we were willing to operate beyond the narrow confines of what we think is possible?